The 1918 Malbone Street wreck, also known as the NYC subway crash, was a tragic event that happened on November 1, 1918 in Brooklyn, New York. The crash, which is still one of the deadliest subway disasters in American history, caused the deaths of at least 93 people and left hundreds injured. The events leading up to the Malbone Street wreck were caused by human error, poor safety measures, and a lack of oversight. The accident happened on the Brighton Beach line of the Brooklyn Rapid Transit Company, or BRT, which is now known as the New York City Subway's B and Q lines. At the time, the BRT was having financial problems, and to save money they hired inexperienced motormen. On the day of the crash, Edward Luciano, a motorman who had only been working for 5 days, was operating a train that was running late. Witnesses said the train was going at a dangerous speed as it approached a sharp curve near Malbone Street. Luciano did not slow down in time and lost control of the train, causing it to derail and hit a tunnel wall. The impact was severe. Several cars overturned, and passengers were thrown from their seats. The wooden subway cars did not have proper safety features like seatbelts or safety bars, which made the number of injuries and deaths even higher. Right after the crash, authorities and emergency responders rushed to the scene to help survivors and treat the injured. The New York Times reported on the disaster and described the confusion and chaos around the site. The public was outraged by the BRT's negligence and demanded justice. The company was harshly criticized for cutting costs and failing to properly train its workers. After the Malbone Street wreck, major changes were made to improve safety on the New York City subway. The Public Service Commission investigated the crash and made several recommendations for stronger safety rules. Wooden subway cars were eventually phased out and replaced with steel cars, which were stronger and provided better protection for passengers during accidents. The Malbone Street wreck is a tragic reminder of why safety must always come first in public transportation. The disaster led to major reforms and highlighted the need for proper training and oversight of transit workers. The victims of the crash continue to be remembered, as their lives were lost because of the failures and negligence of the BRT. Overall, the 1918 Malbone Street wreck was a turning point for the New York City subway. It brought changes that have made the system safer for millions of riders. The lessons learned from this tragedy have had a lasting impact on public transportation in the city and remind us that safety must always be the top priority.
The Love Canal environmental disaster is one of the best-known examples of chemical contamination in the United States. It happened in the Love Canal neighborhood in Niagara Falls, New York, during the 1970s and 1980s. The disaster had wide-reaching effects on the health of residents, the environment, and the legal and environmental responses to events like this. The history of the Love Canal neighborhood goes back to the early 20th century when the canal was dug in an attempt to connect the Niagara River to Lake Ontario as a source of hydroelectric power. The project was abandoned, and later the canal was used as a landfill for chemical waste by the Hooker Chemical Company in the 1940s. The company dumped about 21,000 tons of chemical waste, including toxic substances like dioxins, benzene, and TCE, or trichloroethylene, without proper containment or safeguards. Over time, the chemicals began seeping into the ground and nearby waterways, contaminating the soil and groundwater in the Love Canal neighborhood. Residents started experiencing a wide range of health problems, including birth defects, miscarriages, cancers, and respiratory issues. Children were especially vulnerable, and many developed skin rashes, learning disabilities, and other serious health conditions. The situation became widely known in the late 1970s when Love Canal residents reported unusually high rates of health problems and birth defects. Concerned community members, led by housewife Lois Gibbs, formed the Love Canal Homeowners Association and demanded action from local and state officials. National media coverage of the disaster sparked outrage and led to the evacuation of more than 800 families. In 1978, in response, the U.S. government declared a state of emergency and provided funds to relocate residents and begin cleaning up the site. The Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, designated Love Canal as a Superfund site, part of a federal program created to clean up hazardous waste areas. Cleanup efforts included removing contaminated soil, installing barriers to stop further pollution, and monitoring the site for continued health risks. The Love Canal disaster raised major questions about environmental policy, public health, and corporate responsibility. It exposed the dangers of unregulated chemical waste disposal and showed the need for stronger rules to protect communities and the environment from toxic exposure. It also highlighted the importance of community activism in holding corporations and governments accountable. One important lesson from the Love Canal disaster is the need for proactive environmental policies to prevent similar events in the future. The disaster led to the creation of the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act in 1980. Also known as the Superfund Law, this law created a fund to clean up hazardous waste sites and made polluters financially responsible for the damage they caused. The disaster was also a wake-up call for the public health community. It highlighted the long-term health effects of chemical exposure and the need for ongoing research and monitoring in affected areas. It encouraged more studies into the health impacts of toxic chemicals and led to stronger regulations to protect public health. In terms of corporate responsibility, the Love Canal disaster showed the importance of ethical business practices when handling hazardous waste. It revealed the serious consequences of putting profit ahead of environmental and human health. Today, companies are expected to follow strict environmental rules and take responsibility for safe waste disposal and pollution prevention. Overall, the Love Canal environmental disaster had a major impact on environmental policy, public health, and corporate responsibility in the United States. It became a catalyst for change, leading to stronger regulations and safeguards to protect communities from toxic exposure and to hold polluters accountable. The lessons learned from Love Canal still matter today, reminding us of the need for vigilance and accountability in protecting our environment and public health.
The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire that happened on March 25, 1911 in New York City was a tragic event that had a huge impact on labor laws and worker safety regulations in the United States. The fire, which took the lives of 146 factory workers, mostly young immigrant women, exposed the dangerous working conditions and lack of safety rules in the garment industry at the time. The events leading up to the fire can be traced to the rapid industrialization and urbanization of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. As more immigrants arrived in American cities looking for work, the demand for cheap labor in industries like garment manufacturing grew quickly. Factory owners, focused on profit, took advantage of these new immigrants, especially women and children, who were willing to work for low wages and unsafe conditions. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, located in the Ash Building in Greenwich Village, was one of the largest garment factories in the city. The factory employed more than 500 workers, mostly young Jewish and Italian immigrant women, who worked long hours in crowded, poorly ventilated rooms. The factory owners, Max Blanc and Isaac Harris, were known for harsh treatment of workers, including locking doors to prevent theft and unauthorized breaks. On the day of the fire, a pile of fabric scraps caught fire on the 8th floor of the factory. The flames spread quickly through the building, trapping workers who could not escape because of locked doors and inadequate fire escapes. Many workers were forced to jump from windows to escape the flames, leading to numerous deaths and injuries. The aftermath of the fire sparked public outrage and demands for reform. Labor unions, women's groups, and politicians pushed for stronger workplace safety rules and fair labor practices. The tragic loss of life highlighted the need for better working conditions, fire safety measures, and real enforcement of labor laws. In response, the New York State Legislature created the Factory Investigating Commission, which carried out a detailed investigation of workplace conditions across the state. The Commission's findings resulted in new laws and regulations aimed at improving worker safety, including mandatory fire drills, sprinkler systems, and stronger building codes. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire became a turning point in the labor movement and the fight for worker rights. The tragedy motivated workers and activists to demand change and push for safer conditions. It also showed how gender, class, and immigrant status played a major role in the garment industry, as many victims were young immigrant women who were exploited and overlooked by factory owners. In conclusion, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire was a critical moment in American history. It exposed the dangers of unchecked capitalism and led to important reforms in labor laws and worker safety standards. The legacy of the fire continues today in modern workplace safety practices and the continuing fight for worker rights and social justice. By remembering the lessons of this tragedy, we can keep working towards safer and more fair workplaces for everyone.
The General Slocum Steamboat Disaster of 1904 is one of the deadliest maritime disasters in American history. It resulted in the deaths of more than 1,000 people and left a lasting impact on communities in New York City. This tragic event happened on June 15, 1904. When the General Slocum, a steamship carrying over 1,300 passengers on a leisurely excursion up the East River, caught fire and quickly became engulfed in flames. To understand the events and aftermath of the General Slocum disaster, it is important to consider the historical context. At the turn of the 20th century, steamships were a popular mode of transportation and leisure for New Yorkers. The General Slocum, owned by the Knickerbocker Steamship Company, was a well-known part of the city's maritime scene, famous for excursions to local destinations for picnics and outings. On the day of the disaster, the General Slocum was chartered by St. Mark's Evangelical Lutheran Church for their annual Sunday school trip to Locust Grove on Long Island. The ship was filled to capacity with passengers, many of them women and children. As the General Slocum traveled up the East River, a fire started in the ship's forward lower cabin and spread quickly because of the flammable materials used in its construction. The causes of the tragedy were a combination of factors, including outdated safety features, lack of proper fire drills and equipment, and negligence by the crew. The General Slocum did not have modern firefighting equipment, and its lifeboats and life vests were in poor condition. The crew was inexperienced and unprepared to handle an emergency of this scale. As the fire raged, chaos erupted among the panicked passengers. Many were trapped below deck or jumped into the dangerous waters of the East River. The ship's captain, William Van Schaik, made a critical mistake by steering the vessel toward North Brother Island instead of the nearest shore in an attempt to save the ship. The General Slocum eventually ran aground, allowing some passengers to escape, but the damage had already been done. After the disaster, the response from authorities was immediate. The New York City Fire Department and other rescue teams worked tirelessly to put out the fire and rescue survivors from the water. Victims' bodies were recovered from the river and brought to shore for identification and burial. The city went into mourning as families waited for news of loved ones, many of whom had died in the tragedy. The impact of the General Slocum disaster was felt throughout New York City and across the nation. The loss of life, especially among women and children, shocked the public and raised questions about steamship safety standards. Investigations revealed patterns of negligence and corruption in the shipping industry, leading to calls for reform and stricter regulations. The disaster also had a lasting effect on New York City neighborhoods. The primarily German immigrant community of Kleindeutschland, where many victims lived, was devastated. The neighborhood never fully recovered, as families moved away and businesses closed. In conclusion, the General Slocum Steamboat disaster of 1904 remains a dark chapter in American history. It is remembered for the loss and grief it caused, and the lessons it taught about safety and preparedness in the maritime industry. The memory of those who perished on the General Slocum continues to serve as a cautionary tale of the consequences of negligence and incompetence.
The events of September 11, 2001, left a lasting mark on New York City and the entire nation. The terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center not only caused the loss of thousands of lives, but also changed the city and its residents in profound ways. The impact and aftermath of the attacks were felt immediately and continue to resonate to this day. Leading up to the attacks, the terrorists carefully planned and executed their scheme to hijack 4 commercial airplanes and use them as suicide weapons. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center, followed by United Airlines Flight 175 hitting the South Tower 17 minutes later. The impact of the planes and the resulting fires caused both towers to collapse within hours, trapping thousands of people inside. The response of emergency services in New York City was immediate and heroic. Firefighters, police officers, and emergency medical personnel rushed to the scene to rescue survivors and fight the fires. Many of these first responders risked their lives to save others, and tragically, many lost their lives in the process. The bravery and selflessness of these individuals remain a testament to the resilience and spirit of New Yorkers in the face of disaster. The government acted quickly in the aftermath of the attacks. President George W. Bush declared a state of emergency and authorized a massive rescue and recovery operation. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, was deployed to coordinate relief efforts, and the Department of Homeland Security was created to address national security concerns. In the weeks and months that followed, the United States launched military operations in Afghanistan to target al-Qaeda, the terrorist organization responsible for the attacks. The long-term effects of September 11th on New York City were profound. The Manhattan skyline was forever changed with the destruction of the Twin Towers, leaving a gap in the city's iconic skyline. The loss of life and the devastation affected many residents who lost friends, family members, and colleagues. The psychological impact of the attacks lasted for years, leading to increased security measures and a heightened sense of vulnerability among New Yorkers. The rebuilding efforts in New York City demonstrated the resilience and determination of its residents. The construction of One World Trade Center, also known as the Freedom Tower, and the redevelopment of the surrounding World Trade Center site were monumental projects that symbolized the city's ability to rise from the ashes. The memorial and museum that now stand on the site serve as a solemn reminder of the lives lost and a tribute to the courage and sacrifice of those who responded to the attacks. In conclusion, the events of September 11, 2001, had a profound effect on New York City and the nation. The attacks claimed thousands of lives and caused widespread devastation, but they also revealed the best in the city's residents and first responders. The rebuilding efforts and the memorials at the World Trade Center site are a lasting symbol of the resilience and spirit of New York City. The aftermath of the attacks will continue to shape the city and its people for generations to come. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe for more content.